Americans are great at many things. We invented the internet, put people on the moon, and perfected the art of supersizing everything. But sometimes when we venture beyond our borders armed with nothing but confidence and a passport, we become walking advertisements for why the rest of the world thinks we're absolutely insane. These aren't just innocent cultural misunderstandings or language barriers. These are spectacular displays of American confidence meeting cold, hard reality in the most painful and publicly embarrassing way possible. We're talking about mistakes so monumentally dumb that they become legendary stories passed down through hostels, tour guides, and embassy workers for generations. So buckle up for a journey through the most cringe-worthy, face-palm-inducing travel disasters that prove sometimes the best education comes from watching others fail so spectacularly that you question how they made it through airport security. Here are 33 travel mistakes that will make you grateful for your own common sense. 1. A tourist in Paris spent an entire day trying to find the American Quarter because someone had casually mentioned it was near the Latin Quarter. Armed with this misunderstood information, he wandered the streets for 8 solid hours, stopping confused Parisians every few blocks to ask in increasingly frustrated broken English, "Excuse me, where can I find the part that speaks normal? You know, the American part?" After being directed to various locations by bemused locals who had no idea what he was talking about, he finally broke down and called his travel agent from a payphone. Turns out, he'd been desperately searching for a McDonald's the entire time. The American Quarter doesn't exist. It never existed. But hey, at least he got his steps in. 2. In Tokyo, a woman caused such a commotion at a high-end sushi restaurant that other diners started filming her meltdown. She was furiously waving around a stack of colorful Monopoly money, screaming at the bewildered staff about their refusal to accept her perfectly valid international currency. She'd brought the board game money for entertainment during her 14-hour flight, and somehow convinced herself that all colorful paper bills were universally accepted worldwide. When the manager tried to explain Japanese yen through a translator app, she accused them of discrimination and demanded to speak to someone who understands real money. The video went viral on Japanese social media with the hashtag #PlastMonopolyMoney. 3. A couple in Rome hired a taxi driver and confidently announced they wanted to go to Europe for the afternoon. When the confused driver asked for a specific destination, they explained they just wanted to see Europe real quick before dinner, like it was a neighborhood they could tour in a few hours. The patient driver spent 20 minutes with a map, trying to explain that Rome is in Europe, that Europe is an entire continent, and that you can't exactly see Europe in one taxi ride. Eventually, he gave up on geography lessons and just drove them in circles around the city for 3 hours at premium tourist rates. They tipped him extra for the excellent European tour. 4. During a trip to London, a panicked American tourist called the local police at 3 a.m. because he was absolutely convinced his hotel room was being haunted by an extremely persistent ghost. He described hearing constant, supernatural whistling and moaning sounds that kept him awake all night. When officers arrived, they discovered the source of the paranormal activity was an electric tea kettle that he'd accidentally turned on and left running. He'd never encountered an electric kettle before and had no idea what the continuous whistling sound was. The police report, which became legendary at the station, noted that the ghost was successfully exorcised by unplugging a kitchen appliance. 5. A family visiting Germany turned what should have been a simple 3-hour drive into a 6-hour odyssey of stubborn confusion. They got completely lost because they absolutely refused to acknowledge any road signs that weren't written in English. For hours, they drove past hundreds of perfectly clear international road symbols. Arrows, pictures of gas pumps, universal symbols for restaurants and hospitals, but ignored them all because they were waiting for the English signs to start. They genuinely believed that eventually, if they drove far enough, German road signs would magically switch to English for American tourists. When they finally called for help, the GPS rescue service found them in a small farming village 200 miles in the wrong direction. 6. At the Great Wall of China, a supremely confident American tourist approached a tour guide and asked with complete seriousness where exactly the end of the wall was located, because he planned to walk the entire length before his flight home the next day. When the guide politely explained that the Great Wall stretches over 13,000 miles across multiple provinces and would take months to walk, the tourist became indignant. He insisted this was false advertising because the travel brochure had simply called it a wall, and he'd expected something roughly the size of his backyard fence. He demanded a refund and complained to his travel agent that China was exaggerating their landmarks for marketing purposes. 7. A woman in Barcelona called her travel insurance company in a complete panic to report that someone was systematically stealing her money and replacing it with counterfeit bills in weird colors. She was convinced she was the victim of an elaborate scam targeting American tourists. The insurance representative spent 40 minutes trying to explain that European euros come in different colored denominations: purple for 500s, yellow for 200s, blue for 20s, and that this wasn't fraud, it was just how foreign currency works. She refused to believe that real money could be any color other than green, and insisted someone was sneaking into her hotel room at night to swap out her legitimate American-looking dollars with fake rainbow money. 8. During a visit to the pyramids of Giza in Egypt, an enthusiastic American tourist kept interrupting the historical tour to ask the guide when the construction workers would be taking their lunch break. He wanted to personally meet them and congratulate them on their really impressive work. The tour guide initially thought he was joking, but after 20 minutes of persistent questions about shift schedules, overtime pay, and whether the workers got good benefits, it became clear he genuinely believed the pyramids were an active construction site. When told the pyramids were built over 4,000 years ago, he looked confused and asked, "So they've been working this same job for 4,000 years? That's incredible job security." The other tourists weren't sure whether to laugh or call for medical assistance. 9. A middle-aged couple in Amsterdam nearly caused an international incident at a bike rental shop because the bicycles didn't meet basic safety standards. They loudly demanded models with cup holders, air conditioning, and mandatory seatbelts before they would consider renting anything. When the bewildered shop owner tried to explain that bicycles don't typically come with automotive features, they accused him of running a dangerous, unlicensed operation. Having never ridden bikes as adults, they genuinely expected them to have the same comfort amenities as their SUV back in suburban Ohio. They eventually left a scathing one-star Google review warning other Americans about unsafe European transportation that lacks basic modern conveniences. 10. At an authentic Thai restaurant in Bangkok, a determined tourist sent back his pad Thai not once, not twice, but 3 separate times because it tasted too foreign and exotic. Each time he asked the increasingly frustrated chef to make it more American, like normal food. After the 3rd rejection, the chef finally gave up on authenticity and served him plain rice noodles drowning in ketchup with a side of ranch dressing. The tourist was delighted, left a 5-star review praising the restaurant for finally serving real food instead of that weird spicy stuff, and recommended it to other Americans looking for normal meals in Thailand. 11. A woman visiting Sweden in December arrived at Stockholm Airport wearing flip-flops, a sundress, and carrying nothing but a small summer purse. She'd heard Sweden described as a cool country online and interpreted this as meaning trendy and fashionable, not literally freezing cold. When she stepped outside into sub-zero temperatures and immediately realized her mistake, she was too embarrassed to admit her error and buy appropriate winter clothing. Instead, she spent her entire 5-day vacation trapped in her hotel room, ordering room service and watching Swedish TV, while posting Instagram photos of the view from her window with captions like, "Loving the Swedish culture." Her friends back home never knew she never actually experienced Sweden beyond the climate-controlled confines of her hotel. 12. In Australia, an American man spent his entire 2-week vacation constantly asking bewildered locals why everyone was walking around upside down. He'd somehow convinced himself that since Australia was on the bottom of the world, basic gravity would work differently and people would naturally appear inverted. He took hundreds of photos of people walking normally, convinced he was documenting a scientific phenomenon that no one back home would believe. When locals tried to explain that gravity works the same everywhere on Earth, he assumed they were all in on some kind of elaborate, practical joke being played on American tourists. He left Australia still convinced that Australians had somehow learned to hide their upside-down walking from visitors. 13. A family visiting Mumbai, India became increasingly agitated during their first day because they couldn't locate a single Walmart anywhere in the city. They'd based their entire shopping itinerary around visiting familiar American chain stores and couldn't comprehend why other countries would have different retail establishments. After spending 6 hours taking taxis from location to location, asking drivers to take them to the nearest normal store, they finally called the American embassy to file a complaint about India's false advertising to tourists. They refused to shop at any local markets or Indian stores because they weren't real stores like back home, and ended up buying overpriced snacks from their hotel gift shop for the entire trip. 14. During a trip to Scotland, an American tourist rented a car but completely refused to accept that the steering wheel was positioned on the right side of the vehicle. Instead of learning about left-hand driving or asking for help, he developed his own creative solution that horrified other drivers. Every single time he needed to drive somewhere, he would crawl over the center console to the passenger seat, stretch across to reach the steering wheel, and attempt to drive while lying sideways across both seats. He caused 3 minor traffic incidents and numerous roadside spectacles before police finally pulled him over. When officers asked why he didn't just learn to drive from the right side, he insisted the rental company had given him defective cars with the steering wheels installed backwards. 15. A woman visiting a traditional souk in Morocco spent over an hour haggling intensely with a carpet merchant, negotiating the price down from $200 to $75 through animated gestures and broken Arabic phrases she'd learned from a phone app. Just when both parties were ready to shake hands on the deal, she confidently pulled out her American credit card. When the confused merchant gestured that he only accepted cash, she became furious and accused him of running an elaborate scam. She couldn't comprehend that a small traditional marketplace stall in a centuries-old bazaar wouldn't have modern credit card processing equipment. She stormed off, leaving behind a beautiful hand-woven rug and a very confused seller who had never encountered a tourist who expected to swipe plastic in a 500-year-old marketplace. 16. At Oktoberfest in Munich, Germany, an American beer enthusiast caused a scene at multiple beer halls by loudly complaining that every single beer tasted way too much like actual beer. He traveled thousands of miles expecting to find German versions of American light beer, and was genuinely offended by the rich, full-bodied flavors of traditional German brewing. At each tent, he demanded that servers water down his beer to make it normal and drinkable like Bud Light. When bartenders refused, he accused them of serving fake beer that's too strong and flavorful. He eventually found a tourist trap restaurant that served watered-down international brands and spent the rest of Oktoberfest there, completely missing the point of experiencing authentic German beer culture. 17. A couple visiting Japan turned every meal into an international incident by stubbornly refusing to use chopsticks and demanding forks and knives at every restaurant. When servers politely brought chopsticks, they would loudly insist that real restaurants provide proper eating utensils for paying customers. They systematically left one-star reviews for every authentic sushi restaurant they visited, writing detailed complaints about impossible-to-eat food and discrimination against Americans who want normal silverware. They also requested ranch dressing with literally everything: sushi, ramen, tempura, even green tea, and became increasingly frustrated when servers couldn't fulfill these requests. Their final review claimed that Japan doesn't understand customer service because no restaurant would provide ranch-covered sushi. 18. In Brazil, a panicked American tourist actually called the U.S. Embassy emergency hotline because he was convinced that locals were aggressively speaking Portuguese at him as a form of harassment. He genuinely believed that everyone should automatically switch to English when they saw him approaching, and considered it a personal attack when conversations continued in the local language. He demanded diplomatic intervention and wanted to file formal complaints against specific individuals who had refused to speak American to him properly. The embassy worker who took his call later said it was one of the most bizarre requests in their career, and they gently explained that people speaking their native language in their own country was not actually a human rights violation against American tourists. 19. A woman arriving in Dubai caused a minor security incident at the airport when customs officials discovered her luggage was filled with bags of seashells she'd collected from various American beaches. She'd read somewhere online that shells were valuable international currency and had brought nearly 50 pounds of them to use as payment throughout her trip. When airport security questioned her about the unusual luggage contents, she confidently explained her plan to pay for hotels, meals, and souvenirs using her premium shell collection. She'd even organized them by size and color, convinced that the prettier shells would be worth more in the international marketplace. Security was not amused, and she spent several hours in customs detention, while officials determined she wasn't smuggling anything illegal, just operating under spectacularly faulty economic assumptions. 20. During a week-long trip to Mexico, a family of 4 created their own portable water supply system because they were absolutely terrified of dangerous foreign water. They brought 8-gallon jugs of water from their hometown in Ohio and carried them everywhere, including to restaurants, beaches, and tourist attractions. They refused to drink anything local, including internationally bottled brands like Coca-Cola or Evian, because it might have been contaminated by foreign processing. The family also packed Ziploc bags of dirt from their backyard to sprinkle on their food, believing it would help their digestive systems recognize familiar bacteria. Other tourists stared in amazement as they performed this bizarre ritual at every meal, essentially seasoning their tacos with Ohio soil. 21. A determined American man in New Zealand spent 3 entire days driving around both North and South Islands, becoming increasingly agitated with every tour guide who insisted that kangaroos don't live in New Zealand. He'd seen pictures of Australian animals in his travel brochure and assumed Australia and New Zealand were basically the same place with the same wildlife. When multiple guides patiently explained that kangaroos are exclusively native to Australia, he accused them of deliberately hiding the kangaroos from tourists to create artificial scarcity and drive up prices. He demanded refunds from several tour companies and left angry reviews claiming that New Zealand tourism was a scam industry built on hiding their most famous animals. He flew home still convinced there was an elaborate conspiracy to conceal New Zealand's kangaroo population. 22. At the Louvre Museum in Paris, an overly enthusiastic American tourist decided that the protective barriers around the Mona Lisa were merely suggestions and attempted to climb over them for the perfect selfie. When security guards immediately intervened, he became indignant and complained loudly that the painting was way too small and totally not worth the 3-hour wait. He'd apparently expected the Mona Lisa to be poster-sized, like the reproductions he'd seen in movies and gift shops. His disappointment was so vocal that other visitors started filming his meltdown as he ranted about false advertising and demanded his money back because Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece wasn't large enough to justify its reputation. Security escorted him out while he was still arguing about the painting's inadequate dimensions. 23. A woman visiting Ireland had built her entire understanding of Irish culture around American Saint Patrick's Day. Celebrations in Boston bars, and she was not prepared for reality. She angrily stormed out of authentic Irish pubs because they didn't serve real Irish food like Lucky Charms cereal, green beer, or corned beef and cabbage. She spent her entire trip searching for leprechauns, insisting to locals that they were hiding the authentic Irish experience from tourists. When pub owners tried to serve her traditional Irish stew or fish and chips, she complained that it wasn't Irish enough and demanded they add green food coloring to make it look more festive. She left Ireland convinced that the Irish had lost touch with their own culture, and that Boston knew more about being Irish than actual Ireland. 24. In Iceland during summer, a confident couple rented a regular sedan and drove directly to a glacier, then called emergency services because their car was mysteriously broken and wouldn't drive on the ice. They had absolutely no concept that driving on glacial ice requires special equipment, and assumed their rental car's regular summer tires would work fine on a frozen glacier. When rescue workers arrived, they found the couple standing next to their car, which was completely stuck in several inches of ice, genuinely puzzled about why their vehicle wasn't performing as expected. The rescue cost them over $2,000, and they tried to sue the rental company for not warning them that normal cars can't drive on glaciers, apparently expecting this to be common knowledge that should have been explicitly stated in their rental agreement. 25. A man visiting South Korea became increasingly paranoid during his trip because he was convinced that everyone was following him in some kind of coordinated surveillance operation. His evidence? Multiple people had similar-looking Samsung phones and wore similar casual clothing styles that were popular in Seoul. Having never experienced being a visible minority, he found it deeply suspicious that he looked different from everyone around him, and interpreted normal curiosity from locals as evidence of a conspiracy. He called his embassy multiple times to report organized stalking by Korean nationals, and spent most of his vacation hiding in his hotel room, convinced he was the target of an elaborate government monitoring program, rather than just being a tall white guy in a homogeneous crowd. 26. During a safari in Kenya, an American tourist repeatedly interrupted the wildlife guide to demand that he make the lions do tricks, like the trained animals she'd seen at zoos and circuses back home. When the guide patiently explained that wild lions in their natural habitat don't perform on command, she became increasingly frustrated with the lazy service. She loudly complained that the animals were just lying around doing nothing entertaining, and demanded a full refund because the lions weren't putting on a proper show for paying customers. She actually asked if they could wake up the lions and make them roar on schedule for her photos. The other safari guests were mortified as she continued to treat one of the world's most incredible wildlife experiences like a disappointing theme park attraction that wasn't meeting her entertainment expectations. 27. A family visiting Norway checked into their hotel and immediately called the front desk to complain that their room was too foreign because it had European-style electrical outlets instead of American ones. Rather than using the universal adapter they'd been repeatedly told to bring, they decided to take matters into their own hands. They spent 2 hours in their room trying to reshape their American plugs with pliers from the hotel's maintenance kit, nearly causing a fire and definitely voiding their travel insurance. When the fire alarm went off from the sparks they'd created, the entire hotel had to be evacuated. The fire department found them in their room, surrounded by damaged electronics and melted plastic, still convinced that the problem was with the foreign electrical system, rather than their complete refusal to use a simple adapter. 28. At Machu Picchu in Peru, a woman in high heels and a business suit asked tour guides where she could find the elevator to the top, because she didn't do hiking and had assumed there would be modern conveniences at the ancient site. When guides explained that there was no elevator to a 500-year-old Inca citadel built on a mountain peak, she accused them of false advertising. She demanded they construct temporary elevator access for her visit and threatened to leave negative reviews if they couldn't provide reasonable accommodation for paying tourists. She spent her entire day at the base of the mountain, taking selfies with the distant ruins in the background, while angrily posting on social media about Peru's inadequate tourist infrastructure and discrimination against people who don't want to walk uphill. 29. A man visiting Vietnam spent 3 days completely lost in Ho Chi Minh City because he stubbornly refused to use any maps that didn't show America prominently in the center. He kept rotating his phone map upside down and sideways, trying to find the top part where America should be, so he could properly orient himself. His navigation method involved constantly turning in circles while holding his phone, waiting for the map to fix itself and show America in its correct position at the center of the world. Local police found him spinning in confused circles in the same intersection multiple times, and when they tried to help with directions, he showed them his phone and asked why Vietnamese maps were upside down and backwards. He never did figure out how to navigate when America wasn't the focal point of the map. 30. During a trip to Turkey, a couple spent their entire vacation systematically searching every tourist attraction in Istanbul for the turkey part, where they expected to find farms full of live turkeys roaming around the historic sites. They'd confused the country with the bird and were genuinely disappointed by the lack of Thanksgiving-themed wildlife. They asked tour guides at the Blue Mosque, Hagia Sophia, and Grand Bazaar when they would get to see the actual turkeys that the country is named after. When locals tried to explain that the country wasn't named after the bird, they insisted this was obviously false advertising and demanded to speak to tourism officials about the missing turkeys that should have been prominently featured in all the brochures. 31. A woman visiting the Philippines spent her entire beach vacation complaining loudly to resort staff that the ocean water was way too salty and demanding they fix it immediately. Having apparently never swum in actual ocean water before, she expected all beach water to taste like chlorinated pool water. She made multiple formal complaints to the resort management, insisting they needed to desalinate the ocean for their guests' comfort. She also demanded they turn down the waves because they were too loud at night and interfering with her sleep. The resort staff spent considerable time trying to explain that they couldn't actually control the fundamental properties of the ocean, but she remained convinced they were just being unhelpful and refusing to provide proper customer service. 32. At the Taj Mahal in India, a confused American tourist arrived with printed boarding passes and hotel confirmation emails, expecting to check into what he thought was a luxury resort. He'd booked a room at a nearby hotel that had Taj in its name, and somehow concluded that the famous 17th century mausoleum was actually his accommodation. He stood in the massive crowd of tourists for over 2 hours, pulling out his phone every few minutes to show other visitors his reservation confirmation, and asking where the front desk and bellhops were located. When security finally approached him, he demanded to know why his hotel was so crowded with tourists and why nobody was helping him with his luggage. Even after multiple explanations, he remained convinced that the Taj Mahal was an operational hotel that was just really busy that day. 33. And finally, the most spectacular geographical failure in recorded tourism history. A man confidently flew to Vienna, Austria, and spent 3 days in an escalating rage, furiously demanding to see kangaroos, the Sydney Opera House, and the Great Barrier Reef. He'd booked his entire trip to Austria instead of Australia, and was absolutely convinced that the entire country was playing an elaborate, practical joke on him. He marched into the American embassy in Vienna, demanding they investigate why Austria was pretending not to be Australia, and hiding all the famous landmarks he'd come to see. Embassy workers spent hours showing him maps, explaining the difference between Austria and Australia, and trying to help him understand his mistake. But he remained convinced this was an international conspiracy and threatened to call the FBI about Austria's fraudulent misrepresentation as Australia. He flew home still believing he'd uncovered a massive tourism scam, rather than admitting he'd confused 2 completely different countries on different continents. These aren't just travel mistakes. They're masterclasses in how unshakable confidence combined with zero preparation can transform what should have been dream vacations into legendary stories of American tourists that locals will be sharing at dinner parties for decades to come. Each one represents a perfect storm of cultural ignorance, geographical confusion, and the kind of stubborn determination that somehow turns simple misunderstandings into epic international incidents. The real question that keeps me awake at night is this: which one of these catastrophic failures made you physically cringe the hardest? Was it the woman paying with Monopoly money? The man looking for kangaroos in New Zealand? Or maybe the family who brought their own dirt to Mexico? Drop a comment and let us know which traveler you think deserves to have their passport permanently revoked and should be banned from leaving their home state, let alone their home country. And if you've somehow made it through this entire list without booking an emergency geography refresher course, smash that subscribe button for more stories that prove the world is simultaneously much smaller and infinitely weirder than any of us could ever imagine.